then, so what Matt shared is that by default, IDCOP members who are also school sub-account admins will have access to the Ally reporting data for all of the course sites within their school sub-account. COP members who aren't school sub-account admins can request data from their school sub-account admins or from SDAC, who has access to data for all of the school sub-accounts. They can also view data at the course site level if an instructor adds them to their course site. So that gives you an overview of what access you will have. And like I said, you can always request a report for your college, for whatever, but you do have sub-account access. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to, and Tiffany's here, so she can add on if I say anything incorrectly. But with that, I'm going to pass it on to Al, and Al, it's all yours.
Thank you, Lori, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. To get started here, just want to first talk about what the goal of today's session is, and that is to take you through your institutional report. So unlike earlier when we were in a demo environment, we are actually going to be looking at your numbers and using that to go through and show you how to access the report, talk about what is in there and the different ways that you can utilize that information. Like earlier today, if you have questions, feel free to jump in at any time. Doesn't bother me one bit. So we're going to get started here, and just a quick recap. We talked about this before, but when we talk about the tools that Ally offers, there are the three main components here. We have the student focus component, which is the alternative format, and then we have the instructor focus component, which is the instructor feedback tool. What we're really wanting to look at today, though, is the institutional report. And so this is kind of the administrative level tool that will allow you to be able to see what is happening at your institution from an accessibility level there within your course management system. So part of the things that you'll know is that whenever we connected Ally to your environment, we did a historical scan as well. So now anything new that gets added will be scanned automatically, but we also have some historical data that we'll get to take a look at, and that may be of some help to you as well. So getting started, I don't have very many slides. Most of this is going to be done in the report itself, but just to talk a little bit here, give you a kind of a jump start. This is a look at our overview tab, which has changed actually quite a bit since this screenshot was captured. So we're going to have several different views that we're going to be taking a look at today. And most of them present similar information. It's just at the angle at which you're looking at it from. And they'll make a little bit more sense once we get into it. But like Lori was saying, this will be able to help you identify, where are some of the areas that maybe you're needing to work more at? Is there a particular file format that tends to have more accessibility issues in your environment? And be able to help you find that and then, start to work towards being able to resolve some of those issues there. So a couple things we do have by default, like they were mentioned earlier, if you're a Canvas administrator, either at the main level or at one of the sub-account levels, you're going to have access to this report. If you're coming at a sub-account level, you're going to see your sub-account level. But if you're a full Canvas administrator, then you would be able to see everything. But we do also have the ability to provide an external URL. If there's anyone that does not have Canvas admin access at any level that needs to see this report, there could be an option there to allow that. Normally we leave that up to the administrators there at the institution to decide if they want to share that or not, so we can provide that if needed. Know that it is not exactly the same thing. There are some options that can be turned on for those coming through the Canvas side that will not be available to those that get the direct URL access. So keep that in mind as well. With that said, I'm actually just going to go ahead and jump to the report here. So um, some of the other stuff above this, I just scrolled past is part of our system stuff, so you don't normally see that. But when you come to the report, this is typically what you're going to have access to. And so if you look in the top left corner, there's going to be 4 tabs. And you normally start out on the overview tab, and then there's courses and directory and usage. So I really want to go a bit more in depth in the overview tab, and know that a lot of the design and the layout and those type of things, a lot of the functionality works the same across the courses and the directory tab as well. It's just, again, the different views at which you're taking it from. So on the overview tab, we're looking high level, and oftentimes it may be on a term by term basis or through an academic year, but we're looking at, everything at that point. When we go to the courses tab, we're going to be looking at this data from a specific course level. And then in the directory tab is where your sub accounts are broken out at. So if you wanted to go from this level to look at a specific sub account, we can do that there as well. And I will walk through those. I just wanted to make sure that you understand that there's a lot of, and it's purposeful that we did that so that it's familiar to you. If you're able to navigate the overview tab, then it's not, you're going to see a lot of the same similarities in the directory tab and so on. The last tab, though, that we have here, the usage tab, it's a bit different. It gives you data, but it's from a different perspective um, altogether. And what it gives you is actually information about how people are interacting with Ally itself. So you're going to be able to generate reports to see, you know, are are they using alternative formats? What is the most popular alternative format for this time period? Are instructors interacting with the instructor feedback tool and so on? So and we'll take a look at that too so that you know how to access that. Another bit of structural things before we actually get into the data. In a lot of the views, you're going to see an export button. And I wanted to understand some of the views that we're going to see are filtered. So we may go into a view where we're only seeing courses that have uh, contrast issues in their HTML files. And so that's a filter view that we're seeing, but you may see an export button in that on that view. And if you export that, you're not going to get the filtered data. You're actually going to get the underlying data um, that was used to generate that view. So, but it's going to contain all of it. So this, just keep in mind when you're using the export, don't think of it, you're exporting the data you see here necessarily. You're going to be exporting all the raw data so that if you wanted to generate a view, but maybe with slightly different settings, you can actually use that. Um, you can actually use that to be able to generate your own views or so on. Um, so I can provide whoever for Tiffany's question is what's the process to get someone who needs it the direct URL access. Typically what we do is the administrative contact that we worked with, I'll provide those details with them and then they're able to disseminate that out as appropriate there. So I'll make sure to send that out, and then anybody that may need that can get that from your administrator there. Um, so that's kind of the house cleaning stuff, but actually I now want to jump into the interesting pieces, which is the data itself, right? So starting on the overview tab, we have this graph here that is showing by default it's selected terms here, but it's showing us three different data sets. And if we hold our mouse over, um, so if we look at the fall one, for example, we get 3 different types of numbers here. And so the black line is the overall number. I'm going to come back to that one in just a moment. The green line is labeled WYSIWYG. And so what that weird acronym is referring to is those items that were built inside of Canvas using the Canvas built-in editor or the what you see is what you get editor. So those items that are built through that, when we evaluate those in this graph, we separate them out. So we could see that that is at 98.5%. And then the blue line is the files. So those are the images, the Word, PowerPoint, PDF, HTML files that were created externally and then uploaded into the courses. And so when we evaluate those go toward that file score. And so we see that there's a WYSIWYG score of 98.5 for the fall 22 term, a file score of 42.5, and then an overall score of 59.9. And what that overall score is an average of all of those items that we've evaluated, WYSIWYG and files combined together. And so it looks like there's probably a bit more files than there are WYSIWYG content items, which is pretty typical. But that's where those three numbers come from. Now, uh, one thing to note about um, these averages are straight averages. If you weren't in the session earlier today, one of the things we talked about is that the only weighting that is done in this evaluation process is at the individual content item level. We do a weighting of through the items that are in the checklist. When we evaluate a specific content item, we look to see what issues it may have, and depending on those issues, the score may be weighted more one way or the other if the accessibility items that it has issues with um, is more impactful to the overall document's accessibility or not. So the example I used earlier today was that if an item is its score is going to be impacted more if it's a scanned PDF, even though that's one issue, that is a really severe issue. And so it will dramatically impact the item's accessibility score. If you have a word and if you have another document that has a word with contrast issues, that does not heavily impact the overall accessibility of that document. And so what we see there is that it's not going to impact that score as much. But that is the only level at which our weighting occurs. The rest of this is a straight average. Now, when we talk about, looking at fall 2022, there are actually three data sets that we can look at here. We have academic year, term, and month. Term is one of my favorite, and I'll tell you why. Uh, one of the reasons it's one of my favorites, or at least depending on what you're wanting to look at, and we have, I guess, can go back to the spring 23 here as well. But either way, the term is a time frame that you set. And so you have said, I mean you as an institution, right? You have said, this is a term inside of our LMS, and we know these courses are associated to that term because they belong in that term. So when you see the scores for spring 2023, that is an average of all the course items, whether it's files that were uploaded, files that were created to the WYSIWYG. That's all that combined together for those courses that are a part of that term. Things get a little bit, I want to say, nebulous in a way when we switch to these others, because now it's not based off of a logical grouping that you set. It's based off when the files were updated, or created. And so then that changes. If a file has been updated or created during this academic year, it counts toward this number over here. If it's a file that has not been updated in a year, then it may end up, at the time it was last updated or created. So the academic year and the month, they do have their use, but I want to make sure that you understand what happens, or when a file is in your system, which one of these is contributing to. So if it's a file that was updated last year, hasn't been updated this year, then it may actually be evaluated in this past academic year rather than the current one. And the same thing goes for month, but the month can be very helpful as well, because if you are doing training and you're wanting, you do training in February, and so you come back in April, you will want to see, okay, are the files that are getting uploaded and updated during those times, are are they going up in score or down? So that can help be able to determine, once you've done those efforts, or have you have this smaller time frame that you want to monitor, the month can be very helpful in that because, for February, the only items that are going to be in there are items that were created or updated during that time frame. So then you can use this as kind of a short-term measure of how if you've made any communications or training efforts or anything that those look like. The month view is actually the one to kind of monitor to see short-term how those are impacting your overall scores there. But I like if you're looking at, improvement from year to year and stuff, I like the term view because again, these are logical markers that you created. You selected what courses belong to them based on what's in your system. And so okay, if it's this term, I can go into the file system or go into Canvas and find all the courses that belong to that term and so on. So but they all have their use. I just want to make sure you understood how the files were selected that go into this. I may be in the wrong one, so this is in, what is the URL for your Canvas system? I may have selected the wrong one. I apologize. Because if I remember correctly, you have like an environment. Were you the ones that had the environment that you develop on and then content's copied to another environment or something like that?
Yeah, we have a development environment, but that looks like it should be the right one because it says prod. Um,
I could tell you this is
yep,
canvas.its.virginia.
that's right.
Okay.
Yep, that's production. So I guess
Okay.
the 2020 stuff is just content that was from migrated sites from previous instances.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say if it came through, um, and the file itself has not been updated, and the timestamp still has like, that date on it, then it may be why you have some back in that time frame. It doesn't look like, let's see if there's not very much, and it looks like most of it is actually probably stuff from the courses migrated because they're not actually uploaded files. They're pages and assignments from the LMS itself. So
Yeah,
I
that
would,
makes sense. Those must be the migrated sites from other Canvas installations. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
no, no. Thank you for clarifying that, and that's good. That's one reason why we like to have. I like to use your live environment because sometimes I was working with one institution and they had started maybe a year or two before. They had started doing like really focus on accessibility and started doing training. Um, and you could actually see like they had 4 or 5 years of data on their system, and you could actually see the scores for their data start to trend upward after they had started doing their training. Um, and so before it was kind of stagnant and maybe even down some. But they were like, wow, it looks like we actually were making an impact there. So that's one of the reasons why I love having, you know, um, look using your actual data because you get to see, what's in here more than I do, and so you get to see better what is actually uh, on there. So I'm assuming this spring 2023, this is actually the current term. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to use this as we go down to look at some of these other examples. I will say that looking across here, normally um, especially like last fall and then this spring, one of the scores that I really look at is the file score because that's a good indicator of the stuff that was uploaded. Typically, for those that are starting with Ally, just turning it on in their system or just having it implemented, we see that normally they're in the 20, closer to the 20%, but normally they range between 20 and 40% for that particular score. You're actually closer to the upper end of that than what we typically see. So that that's good news to me. I know we always want things to be higher, right? But this is actually, like I said, this is one of the better starting points that I've seen looking at uh, an install here for an Ally environment. So So it looks like you're already doing a lot of things well. And so hopefully this will help you to be able to improve upon that. So scrolling down to the next section of data, and some of this is pretty simplistic. Starting on I'll take the two outside first. On this side, we have the total courses. And again, this number may be a little bit off compared to what you're thinking inside of your Canvas environment. It may be a little bit less. And part of that is that if a course shell is created and there's no content in it, Ally indexes it so Ally knows that it exists, but it does not include it in these calculations here. So if it seems like maybe this is a little bit low, it may be possible, I'm not saying it is, but it may be possible that there are some empty course shells that are associated to that term, but they don't have anything that Ally is able to scan in them. And so Ally says, okay, that I know that course exists, but we're not going to include it in our calculations because there's nothing in there we can evaluate. So this is the total number of courses that had content in it that Ally could evaluate that are associated to the spring 2023 term. And this number below is just, it does a comparison to the previous term. And for some reason, it looks like they're a bit out of order. I don't know if it may be if you have dates associated with your terms in Canvas or not. I may need to go back and resync the terms just to make sure those get picked up. But it's looking back to this one. So under this workspace term, there are quite a bit of courses. So I think that's why the 83%. I'm guessing if we looked at the fall and then some of these others, it would be much larger. So I think, um, again, some of this is just probably where you're going through some of those migrations, but that's what this number is generally there for, is to compare it. And it tells you what term it is compared to when you hold your mouse over that. The number on the right
Ju-
here, oh, go ahead.
Just to explain those terms, most of our courses right now are going to be in the migrations and workspace terms because most of our migrated sites from previous systems are going into migrations.
Okay.
And so we're going to have probably a lot more content there and probably a lower score there is my guess. And that's going to continue, I think, to decrease as we add some more older content in. And then the workspaces are everybody has a workspace to sort of play around in and test things out. And so that's why there are so many of them. All the instructors and graduate students have them.
Okay. So that makes sense then. Yeah, that why there is that much courses, but actually it looks like the funny thing is that there's less content in there. And it looks like based on, I'm going to guess that most of the content here is actually, yeah, it looks like there's a lot of pages and syllabi, uh, not nearly as many uploaded files. So there's less content in there, but definitely a lot more courses. So that makes a lot of sense. Um, the number, so this graph on the right is just a representation of what we see up here. So we see that the overall score is in the middle at 59.9%. Then going from the middle, the orange is just a graph for that. And then the gray is for the uploaded files. So the Word and PowerPoints and PDFs, those type of things. So it's at 38.5. And then the outer circle here is the WYSIWYG content at 98.9. So it's just a circle graph representation of what we see when we mouse over up here. But this middle part is really the big piece of this information, because not only do we get to see the number of files that we have, but we actually get to go around this and see what that breakdown looks like. And so the most prominent amount of content with over 43,000 files here at over 28% is PDF documents. And so we go on around and we can continue to see how that breakdown looks. So that's the most content used. And then we have pages, which are over 24,000 of those at 16%. And when we say pages, those are those content pages that you create using the editor built into Canvas. Then continuing clockwise here, The next one that we have is images, and there's over 22,000 of those at 14.69%. So our top three content items are images, pages, and PDFs. So we can imagine that, at least half of our issues are going to fall, statistically speaking, should fall into one of those categories, right? And then coming on around at less than 10% is Word documents. And we do support like the LibreOffice versions as well. So when it says Word, it's referring to both Microsoft Word, um, and if anybody's using the other Office, it's included in that. Then we have assignments that are over 10,000 at 6.88%. And yeah, I've seen that too, Tiffany. And typically, normally PDFs and Words are in the top, Word documents are in the top three, and sometimes it fluctuates around. It's not unusual though. It seems like with Canvas, I don't know if it's because the way the interface encourages, uses images more or whatever. It seems like in Canvas environments, I do see images rank higher than I do in other LMSs, and I think it may be just the way the tools are laid out, or the way the courses are laid out, but it seems like, or maybe the way they're even stored. I don't know, um, but normally images will be up a little bit higher in a Canvas environment um, than you may see in something like Learn or even Brightspace. It seems like that's just my personal observation. I don't have any statistical data to actually support that, but that's normally what it feels like I see. Um, and then we have, like I said, assignments at 6.88%. Those are items that were built with the assignment tool in Canvas. And presentations are PowerPoint or the open office version of that. And so they're coming in at 6.07% at over 9,000 items. And this category is one that I want to make sure we get to. You may see when you're looking at other terms as well. The other category are uploaded files. So these are items that have been uploaded to courses in Canvas, but they are not file types that we support in terms of being able to evaluate them. So what happens is, it may upload, a zip file, and Ally will get notified. It'll go pull it and say, oh, wait a minute, this is a zip file. So yeah, this file exists on their system, but we can't evaluate it. And so when that happens, we acknowledge it in this other category. We don't use it in our calculations because there's no way we could evaluate it. But so we want to make sure that, when you're looking at your files and in these calculations, that those are accounted for. So those items, it could be zip files, it could be proprietary files, like if you're teaching an art class and you're maybe digital art, and so you're using Photoshop or Illustrator files and you're uploading those to share with your students, we can't scan those. So anything like that, that is outside of the types that we support, if they get uploaded into the course, made available to students, we will acknowledge it exists, but there's nothing we can do to evaluate it. And so we just document it under this other category. And then we have announcements, which are at 3.69%. So these are all the announcements that are created inside of the Ally tool, the Canvas tool that Ally is able to scan. And then discussion topics again at 3.16%. These are items, discussion topics that were created through that tool in Canvas. Then we have quizzes at a little over 2%, and syllabi at 1.64%. And then HTML files, which is an uploaded file. And this one is one I see more and more near the bottom, just because most people are not creating a lot of HTML content natively anymore. And so typically this one is lower on the lower end. So there's a little over 2,000 of those that are at 1.34%. So that's what for right now for this term here, that's what the content breakdown looks like. So looking at the top four, we have PDFs and then pages, which are uh, pages you should not run into a lot of issues with those, because the way the editor is built, it really helps encourage good habits anyways. And then the same with the images, maybe because um, it does check to see if there are descriptions for those. And so but that gives you an idea of the file breakdown for that term. And you can, again, if you want to switch to one of these other views, you can view the same information and just looking at select the content that's been updated or edited over the year. Looking at that, it's still representative here. We see that PDF is 1, Pages 2, Images 3, and then Word documents is 4. Um, so it doesn't really change a whole lot when we look from going from the term to the academic year. But even if we go, I don't know if there's, yeah, I think there's not a lot in these other terms, it sounds like, to be able to look at. The last segment on the overview tab, though, is then a breakdown of, so we've seen kind of what the overall scores are. We've seen what the file breakdown looks like. This is a breakdown of the accessibility issues that we've identified with that content for this particular term. And these are ordered by default under the All tab. They are ordered by nothing other than the number of occurrences of this particular issue. You will see flags to the left of this that indicate their severity. And so uh, it looks like that your top issue is a minor issue, so that's good. And it's, the first severe issue we see is not until we get to number 9. So again, all that's good news, right? We don't want the most severe issue to also be the most prevalent one, right? So that's good news. But if we want to be able to filter these out, we can click on these tabs and then be able to see um, all of the severe issues. We can filter out all of the major issues, and then we can also take a look at all the minor issues. And so you're able to filter all those out. Furthermore, if you want to pick an issue, and then you can then see what courses contain files that have this issue. So if we go with, we'll go with a simple one here. So there are almost 24,000 files that have contrast issues. So when we go to this view, we're going to get a little description of what this issue is. Again, the number of items that have this issue, and then we're going to get a listing of the courses with this particular issue. So, and this list has 3 pieces of information. The first one from the left is the number of students that are in the course. Then the next number is the number of occurrences or the number of items with this issue inside that course. And then the last number is the overall score for that course. But this list is sorted by the number of items. So the course at the top of this list will be the course that has the most occurrences of this issue within it. So if we go to the last, then we should see, yeah, there's some with just 1 here. So that's how this list is sorted. Even furthermore, we can actually click on a course to then get a view of the files that have this issue. So similar view, we get a breakdown again of what this issue is, and then the number of files in this course that have this issue. And then we actually get a listing of all the files. Now, there's 2 big differences. I talked to you about the external link earlier and some of the features. One of the features that you have the ability to turn on inside of your Ally configuration is the ability that if you're a Canvas administrator coming in, that you can actually try to remediate the content from the institutional report. So instead of actually then having to go to the course, if you're wanting to help somebody fix something, you could do it right from this report. Um, the other part is there is a go to course link, but there is nothing that we are doing that, like, we're not crafting a link that's going to give them permission to go into your Canvas environment. All this link is going to do, and I'll click it to show you, is that it's going to direct you to that. It'll give you the information to get to that course, but you are still going to have to provide credentials that have access to that course within the Canvas environment. So if I'm a Canvas administrator and I click that link and I'm already logged into Canvas, I'm going to go into that course because I'm already have an active login, right? If I'm using an external link and I don't have a Canvas login, I'm not going to be able to get to that course. You can see here it's prompting me for a login that I don't have. So that's just something to keep in mind. We're not giving anybody access to something they don't already have. So if they're going to use that go to course link, it does require them to be able to provide credentials within Canvas that has already has access to that. Otherwise, if you do have Canvas credentials that do not have some permission to that course, what will probably happen is you'll log in and then it'll tell you, you'll get some message that you do not have access to this course in some form or fashion. What you can do is actually, if you wanted to take a look to see why this scored so low, we can click on the document and be able to at least get a preview of the document. So I could take a look here. And so that's saying that there's some instances, I don't know if it may end up being on the calendar or something here that it's saying that it may be maybe the lighter blue, that there are some items here that have contrast issues. Um, so that is the file that it's reporting on. So that one, that file has a 5%, and we can click on any of these files to get a preview of what that is. And like I said, if we do an export course here, we're not going to get a list of all these files here. We're going to get a list of every file in this course. But then you can filter in Excel or whatever data software you use. You could then use that to create kind of your own filter and be able to take a look at that if you wanted. And so we can navigate back to the course, back to these issues, but this gives you a breakdown of, like I said, for everything in this term, this gives you a breakdown of all the issues that we've identified in that. And so you can go in and take a look at the courses from that. Now, if we jump to the courses tab, we're not going to see the first part's going to be different because we have a way, because we're basically presented with, why is Chrome doing this to me? I was having this trouble yesterday for some reason. If I've been logged in for a while, it doesn't want to refresh properly. So the first thing is that we don't present all the courses initially. We present all the courses based on term. So if you're looking for a course, you'll want to first select the term that it's in and then try to search for it. So if it's not technically associated with a term, then it ends up under default term, right? And so you can then be able to search for courses here. So if I do a search for math, it will search in either of these fields, so the ID or the title of the course. And so you can see all of the ones that are listed here. If I wanted to see, um, all the ones that are, so we've got 3 of these: Introduction to Probability. And then if I click on one of these, we do get some information cursory here. We get the number of students in the course, the number of scannable content items or the number of items in the course, and then the course score that we see here. But if we click on this, we get a similar breakdown that we had on the overview tab. We don't get the graph, but we do get a breakdown of the content, just like we've seen on the overview tab, but it's just for this course. We get a breakdown of the score, so we see that the files here are at 6.9%. It has an overall score of 24.4 and a WYSIWYG score of 100. And then when we scroll down, we get a breakdown of the accessibility issues we've identified within this course. So there's no severe ones. They're just uh, the document is untagged, and then there's some that have the languages not set in the document. And then again, we could click on one of these and be able to view all of the files in the course. that have that particular issue. So again, we kind of reuse some of that same structure there as you go between the overview tab, the courses tab, and then you'll see it here in the directory tab. Now the directory tab's going to be more like the overview tab though, because what we could do is we can actually view the report. Let me go to, um, this looks like that has a lot of active, the Canvas fall palette. So if I click on view report for this level here, it actually is going to be like it's taking me to an overview tab again. But now instead of being the full system, I am underneath the full system at the UVA Canvas fall pilot level. And so then within that level, it breaks down the term or the academic year if I want to view that. It breaks down the content distribution across that time frame or across that term, just like we've seen with the overview tab. And then it also breaks down all of the issues. And then again, if we go into these issues, we're going to see the courses underneath that sub-account that have that particular issue. So it's just like the overview tab, but instead of it being the whole system, it is just the view from that sub-account down. And we can even, um, if we go back to the directory here, there's sub-levels under this. And so if we pull that out, then we could actually go into one of these sub-levels and again have that same view. But now if we look to the top, we're actually two more levels down. So we're not at the main level and we're not even at that sub-account, we're underneath that. But again, we still get that same view. And so if you're using a sub-account and you click on the report, this is where you're going to actually come in at wherever your sub-account is in that structure. That's where you're going to come into this report at, and that's what you're going to have access to. The last thing on this page I want to show is the usage tab. And so this one, like I said, this presents different information than what we're used to seeing under the other three tabs. This is going to give information, and I'll just do this so that we have just something to look at. This is going to generate an Excel file, and it's going to tell us about interactions with the instructor feedback tool and the alternative formats. And this one can take, it does, once you request it, it does get cached. So keep that in mind. So it does take it sometimes a minute or so for it generates. And so there's one thing to remember when this happens, and oftentimes if you download an Excel spreadsheet, it ends up in this protected view. And the way that this report works is that there's 5 sheets in this. 4 of them are actually the reports, and you'll notice the last one is data. And so oftentimes people will download this, open it up and say, well, there's no data in here. But what happens is that these calculations are not allowed to run until it's in edit mode or out of that protected mode. So if I enable editing, we then should see, depending on what, there may not be, and then jumped off the screen again. So we do get some data in here. So looking at the alternative format launches from the 1st to the 10th of February, we do see, that there were over 2,000 launches of the alternative formats window, and then almost 1,000 downloads. So we talk about conversion rate. That means the number of times that the percentage of times that people hit this window and then actually completed a download of the file. So, and then we also further break down to let you know of these 955 downloads, how many of those were actually from unique users. So we had, for that time frame, 483 users that downloaded alternative formats. And then we just do a graph to the right um, I'm sorry, I was just looking at the chat here. I guess I missed the step of enable editing. Yeah, it we actually got and still get support requests of why the reports don't work, and oftentimes it's because that little thing, because you don't really see it when it comes up, because the other stuff loads. So that is something to definitely watch out for. Um, so we see that this information then is also provided visually in a graph to the right, for those that are that prefer the more visuals here, like me. And then in the second section of this page, we have the downloads by alternative format type. So it looks like tagged PDF is by far the leader here, with HTML being second. And then it looks like there's a lot of EPUB users as well, over 100 there. Um, and then we have OCR PDF, and then audio, and then the Beeline, and actually have some using Braille as well. So that's a really good distribution there of the different types. And then going down even from that, we have a breakdown by courses, of what the alternative formats where those downloads are coming from. So we can actually see what courses are using that the most. So you can see here, it looks like, nope, there's one with 70. Um, so again, there's still a lot of courses here that are using these as well. It looks like there's a couple of courses with over 50 in them. So there's that one, or close to 50. So this one, Introduction to Programming, has 49, and then there's some with 20 and 30. So it's a really good breakdown of the alternative formats. And then we can also look, this just gives us a weekly view. And so this kind of just spans a couple of weeks here. So we can see what that looks like. So the total downloads, it went up a bit from the first week to the second week in this data. Same for obviously the launch alternative, the window when you launch that went up about the same as well. So that's interesting. And so then we also get a look into the instructor feedback. And so this is a breakdown, again, like when they launched the download window and then actually download the file. We break this down into the number of times that the instructor feedback tool was launched, and then the number of times that a new file was uploaded, that whatever it was, that there was some completion of part of that process. So it looks like for this time there were 112 launches of the tool, and then 6 times that fixes were applied. And then we also see that there were 26 launches of the course accessibility report. So just like with the alternative format launches, we get a breakdown visually of what that looks like. And then we also get a breakdown of the courses where those launches occurred. And well, not all the launches, I'm sorry, where the fixes occurred. And so you can see what that breakdown looks like as well. And then we use the same weekly display here for the instructor feedback tool, where we show the number of launches, the number of fixes, and the launches of the report, and we graph that over the week, a weekly time frame here. So we have the first week and then the second week. And then the last tab, if you're interested, this is all the data that is downloaded that generates those views. So if there's something you're interested in, you can, if you've got somebody that, or if you know a lot about Excel or about data analysis, you can actually go in and start to form your own reports as well if you'd like. So that is, there is one more thing that's kind of outside the report that I want to show you very quickly, but I want to pause here to see if there's any questions about the report itself. Okay. I do want to mention, I didn't mention this earlier today, in the client configuration area. So whenever users launch the instructor feedback tool, or they launch the help or the alternative formats, there are help options in there. And as an institution, you can actually customize those. So by default, it points to our documentation page, but you can customize these to point to your own resources, or you can even add if there's an email address or some type of automatic ticketing system that if they request help, they can actually send that direct, there's a box where they can type in a message and send that directly to someone. You don't have to use that. You can leave it the way they are right now. It just points to our help website with the resources we have. But I did want to make sure I mentioned this. You may have already looked at it, but if you hadn't, I did want to make sure that you were aware that this is out there. And I think you've already touched on the features here. Look, I think you went through and made some of those changes already. So I don't want to waste time going back through that. But if you do have any questions on these, I'd be glad to answer that as well. But that is all that I want to cover today. I do want to remind everybody if, and I don't have a hard stop, so if you have questions, I'm willing to stay behind. But do want to remind everybody, if you, especially if you weren't on the session earlier, if you do get a chance, go register at our user group website, usergroup.ally.ac, and that way you can, if you have any feedback you want to provide to the product team, you want to see what other people at other institutions, your peers across the country and the globe are doing with Ally, that's a good place to go. And then, like I mentioned, we do have resources available at help.blackboard.com/Ally. Um, so that's a good question. So is there a way, let me make sure I understand this. So the question is there a way to customize a specific type of resource, in particular, like looking at YouTube videos without caption flags that don't have guidance associated with them yet? Um, so there's not a way to target. So like this help only comes up when, you're working, if you're in the instructor feedback tool and you see, you're looking through the list of issues and you find an HTML file that has an embedded YouTube video that doesn't have captioning. I don't think there's a way where you can say only show this resource when someone encounters that. You could, I mean, if you had a resource that you want to direct them to, um, I'd imagine that it would be possible, to call it out in this Chrome doing.
So right now, I was thinking, that particular item doesn't have guidance associated with it, and it says like guidance coming soon. Um,
Uh,
and in many cases, YouTube videos that will be flagged for that aren't ones that the instructors own. But there is a workaround that they can put that YouTube video, link that YouTube video into our Kaltura instance and use
mhm,
Kaltura to request captions and get professional captions added to them.
mhm.
Um, so I would like to, when it says, hey, here's a YouTube video embedded without captions, be able to say, instructors, you can, you know, follow the instructions in these two help articles to have captions add to the video and then re-embed it. And then you'll have a fixed one. Does that
So
make sense?
that does make sense. I don't think that we can do that right now. The only thing I could think you would be able to put a link to that information or put that information specifically if you did like custom help for the instructor feedback, but that would still require them going down to the bottom and clicking the help link to be able to see that. So it's not something that would automatically show up whenever they go into the guidance piece, right? Um, but
Yeah, and
that would be a good feature request to say, if we already have workarounds for this particular issue, to be able to either append or replace, uh, guidance for those particular scenarios with your own documentation.
yeah. I mean, because I don't want this particular guidance coming up for every item. I mean, it's not relevant for 90% of the content items,
Right.
but for that particular feedback, I'd like, to have all of the other feedback be Ally's default, but for this particular type of content item, specific instructions for how to fix it. You know, because when we do get the videos without captions, depending on the service that the instructor is using, I know that's not fully developed yet for Ally's detection, but depending on the service the instructor is using, we'll need different guidance per service for how to fix the video without captions. So
Yeah, I that is not currently available, but that is something, and it may already be if you do get a chance to go to the user group. If somebody has not posted that yet, I think that would be something very excellent to bring up to the team. The ability to customize or even create new um, guidances, because this isn't technically help in the sense that, I mean, like, not in the ally sense, right? Because what we're wanting to do is actually inject guidance on how to fix the accessibility for this document, right? So
yeah,
under this specific scenario. So the only way I would know to do that is they would have to modify ally itself to allow that, and it doesn't currently do that. But I don't know if anybody's ever presented that to me or not. I don't recall hearing that idea before. So I haven't looked on the user group in a while. So it may be something that's already out there and you can, append your request to that. But if not, it may be something good to bring up so that the product team sees it, but also other institutions can weigh in on that. And that really does help. Getting that feedback from other places really does give our product team some idea about, if we spend time implementing this, is this something that's really going to be used and worthwhile for our users? And so, which I, I think that's a good idea.
yeah. There was actually a lot of discussion yesterday at the Ally office hours of concerns about certain items saying guidance coming soon. And I know that the Ally team said you're working on those, but if we could simply fix them ourselves and provide the guidance, I think that would be helpful,
Hmm.
especially for particular content items that we may have services available at UVA that other schools might not have available to help remediate
Hmm.
certain content items.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that would be wonderful if they, like I said, I definitely go and share that with them in the user group. I'll
I'll
go
do
ahead.
that. Thanks.
Have an email with some follow-up questions anyways from earlier, so I will mention that to the product team myself. But I know, and I've done this multiple times, and I know what the feedback will be is we'll note that, but can you have them go to the user group too? So that's why I'm just going ahead and
I
telling you.
Yeah, I will. I
Mhm.
already posted some ideas in the idea board. One of the things that I'd really like to see is not 100% for all of these HTML documents that have links of a link text of click here, this link, because there are a lot of those. I see them all the time working with people. So I know that those documents are not 100% accessible, but Ally's not detecting poor quality link text. So.
Yeah. Yep. That would be. I guess they consider that falls under the. Well, there's still room for improvement.
Well, no, I mean, it's just not a detected
No,
item at
right.
all.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I was saying is they did used to be that they would just say, the under the 100% score, the feedback was, you know, you're perfect, or this file is perfect, and they've actually changed that now to say, we don't detect anything, but there still may be ways to improve upon that. So um, I was just kind of joking that I'm guessing right now it falls under the, yeah, we don't detect it, but it still needs some improvement area.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for a great session. I gotta go to another meeting.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody who hung in there. We
Yes,
went
yes,
over a
thank you
little
all.
bit, But thanks again. And yeah, if we could make sure that we make this recording available, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you,
work